We need to take a broad look at our whole tax system to get at the fairness issue, to get at the stability issue, and really to build a tax system today that's going to grow in the future.
There's going to be enormous cuts and really a shredding, I think, of the social safety net.
Democratic Visions is handmade in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka by DFL Senate District 42.
About this report that just came out a couple days ago, this 2009 tax incidence study that would purport to show, and probably accurately, that the top 10% of the wage earners, their percentage of tax as opposed to their income went down between 2004 and 2006, where every other bracketed slice of taxpayers, their tax increased substantially over that same period. Is that fair? Should that be addressed in this session of the legislature in some way or another?
Minnesota still does have a more progressive income tax system than many states, but it has retrogressed. It has gone down. I think the bottom group of taxpayers now, we're talking $10,000 a year or so, are paying almost 17% when you consider sales tax, property taxes, FICA, the federal taxes. The top group are paying about 8.9%, 8.6%. A person like myself is paying somewhere around 12.5%, 13%, I would say. So there is a differential there. So many people see that as the solution, and Representative Thissen may want to visit more on that, but there is a political reality here and economic downturn, and some argue that as President Obama has chosen, instead of calling for the repeal of the tax on the upper income, he's decided to let that happen when it goes out. And so there's a debate in the state about taxes at this time. But otherwise, there's going to be enormous cuts and really a shredding, I think, of the social safety net that Minnesota has traditionally always supported.
Well, Paul, do you think that the legislature has the willingness to pass a tax increase aimed at the higher wage earners, particularly under circumstances where it's unlikely that that would survive or would be certainly subject to a gubernatorial veto?
I think that's going to be a really tricky question, and I think it's going to depend ultimately on how far the legislature is willing to go to stand up to make sure that we don't shred the safety net ultimately, because Governor Plenty is going to be very resistant to any tax increase, and he's made that very clear. You know, I guess what I would say is I do think that this issue of tax fairness, I'm not surprised by the tax incidence study. We've known this has been the case for a while. I would say for that really low income, the 17%, there is some credits they get back against that I don't think were counted in the tax incidence study. But particularly for middle class folks, they are paying more than the top end. And that is something we really need to take a very close look at. I mean, I think Minnesotans get that basic fairness argument. And so I think it's a fair game. And I also think that we need to recognize the fact we're taxing an economy of 30 years ago, and we need to kind of bring that up to date. And so there's some proposals out there now to even readjust on a tax-neutral basis how we go about doing that.
Let me fire one out at you. I heard Senator Ann Rest today say that she's a proponent of broadening out the sales tax. What do you think about that?
On this whole issue of finding revenue, I think it's my feeling that the legislature is going to work very hard to try to find tax or savings in the budget first, to see how far we can go with that, and to maybe make some tax neutral adjustments so that the revenue stream is not so volatile. This is an enormous problem for the state. My inclination is to concentrate on those issues first. And I think then if the population feels that there has been a legitimate effort and a real result in trying to control or reduce spending in those areas that, that there's a political consensus, then at that point, maybe there will be a discussion of what else we can do, to plug the revenue shortfall. But we have to do it. It's going to happen one way or another. The question is who's going to carry the greatest pain, I would say.
Well, we'll get into that in just a minute, but I wanted to ask you, Paul, same question. Would you support a bill that broadened out the sales tax? Assuming that you went through the exercise you just talked about of trying to find other savings and really cutting things to the bone as much as possible.
I mean, to be honest, I think it's something, regardless of this budget deficit and how we resolve that, I think it's something that we need to take a look at in Minnesota. And I am open, certainly, to doing that for the stabilization issues. And there's other taxes that probably don't make as much sense. You know, the corporate income tax ultimately gets passed right on to consumers. It's not it may not make the most sense. We need to take a broad look at our whole tax system to get at the fairness issue, to get at the stability issue, and really to build a tax system today that's going to grow in the future.
I want to now get into some of the consequences of the financial plight that we find ourselves in. And I'll start with you, Paul, if you don't mind. You were chief author of the Children's Health Services Act, which put some 40,000 kids with health insurance. I guess they were eligible if their family made less than $60,000. Is that correct?
Roughly, yeah.
And now, do I understand that the governor is looking at cutting back that in his budget proposal?
He is a little bit, but the one thing he actually is, to be honest, is he's not touching kids coverage.
Okay.
But he's proposing to cut parents, and one thing we know for sure is that when parents get cut, their kids drop off as well.
So he's proposing to cut the working poor?
About 85,000 people. Now, the other piece that's important, about 85,000 to 114,000, depending on how you count it, Minnesotans would lose coverage under the budget the governor proposed in January. With the stimulus package, and there's strings attached to that, to take that stimulus money, he's not going to be able to make as deep cuts as that. So that helps us quite a bit.
Well, do you think that there will be people cut from the rolls of the insured?
Well, the governor will propose that, and I think, I mean, to be quite honest, to balance this budget, there probably will be people that lose health insurance in this.
What about in education, John? I know you're a former educator. What effect is this budget going to have on education, both K-12 and higher education?
The governor's proposal was to have no harm or not to reduce, in fact, to increase some spending for K-12.
Yes.
And, I'm encouraged by that, except the reality is that almost 40% of the state budget goes to education. Minnesota now ranks among the top states in the tuition charge for young people who go to our state colleges and universities. And the governor is proposing a major cut there. Now with the stimulus package, he has decided that he will take every dollar. I'm on the Finance Committee, as you mentioned, and we did have testimony from the administration that they were going to seek every single dollar. Mm-hmm. And so there is some discretionary money, I think about $500 million from the federal government, and I suspect what may happen is a proposal will come from the governor's office to take a significant part of that to fill in the suggested cuts in support for post-secondary.
Democratic Visions is handmade in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka by DFL Senate District 42. Norbert Gurnis, Chair.